Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I would like to speak briefly about the measure that we have on the floor today, the Every Child Achieve Act, the bill that we've all been waiting for about 15 years to fix the flawed one-size-fits-all, no child left behind act. And I want to start my comments by thanking Senator Alexander, who's the chairman, as well as Senator Murray, the ranking member, for how they have managed this legislation from the very beginning. I think we know that there's a little bit of inside baseball that goes on around here that perhaps isn't interesting to many, but I think it is important to note that Chairman Alexander and the ranking member Murray have led this bill in a way that has fostered consensus building and I think very, very constructive negotiations. And more importantly, the process that they allowed the voices of American people, of Alaskans, to be heard. And I think that was one of the reasons why you saw this legislation move unanimously through the HELP Committee in April. And I think that's one of the reasons that you're seeing us move through a series of amendments on issues that are considerable, but in a very constructive manner and certainly respectful of one another. And so I want to acknowledge and recognize the masterful work that they have done in guiding this bill forward. I'd also like to recognize the work that my staff, Karen McCarthy on my staff, has done yeoman's work in working with so many Alaskans, educators, administrators, the like. That has been an effort that I think has yielded benefit to the folks in my home state. But I also want to recognize the work of those on both Senator Murray's staff as well as Senator Alexander's very hardworking professional staff who are a credit to their senators and their state. So why am I standing here today before you in support of the Every Child Achieves Act? When Alaskans are visiting about the education bill that we know as No Child Left Behind, it was clear that to a number, whether you're an educator, whether it's students, parents, tribes, didn't make any difference. Nobody was happy. The one-size-fits-all mandate, poor tribal consultation, the lack of state and local control over our children's education were clearly not working. I say that one of the first immersions into politics that I had was when I was a PTA president at my son's elementary school. And that, for me, was my first introduction to what it meant to the mandates coming out of No Child Left Behind when our school was deemed as a failure because we failed to meet AYP because of the 31 different ways to fail. We certainly made it by not having sufficient subgroups taking the test on the day that the test was required. Our neighborhood school was a failure. Didn't seem to me that it made sense and still does not. And so making sure that taking that experience as a mom and as a PTA president and as one who No Child Left Behind was not just some theoretical exercise, it was federal law imposed in my town, in my school, that had a negative and a direct impact on those who were part of our school. So my top priority was to make sure that any rewrite of No Child Left Behind gave more power to make decisions about Alaska's schools to Alaska and to our local communities. The failed experiment of adequate yearly progress had to go. Under the Every Child Achieves Act, that's done. The failed highly qualified teacher mandates that made little sense and did not work also had to go, and they're gone. States will again be able to decide what qualifications and skills to demand of teachers and principals, whether to have a statewide evaluation system, and if so, whether those evaluations include growth in student proficiency. Now, I am very aware that some across the country, and in fact I've heard from some in Alaska, some are concerned that the Every Child Achieves Act does not do enough to return local control to schools, that it perpetuates somehow the Common Core standards. And in fact, the Every Child Achieves Act specifically and expressly prohibits the Secretary from having any authority to, I quote, mandate, direct, control, coerce, or exercise any direction or supervision over any of the challenging state academic standards adopted or implemented by a state, close quote. Now, I've also heard that some are concerned that the bill maintains secretarial approval of state plans, with the implication then that the Secretary will be able to deny or to change elements of states' plans, whether it's state standards or assessments or accountability systems, as somehow a condition of approval. But the Every Child Achieve Act also places a number of limitations on the Secretary's authority over the state's plans. The Act prohibits the Secretary from requiring a state to include or delete any element of its state plan, state standards from the state plan, use specific assessment instruments or items. It sets goals, timelines, weights, or significance to any indicators of student proficiency, include or delete from the plan standards, measures, assessment, student growth benchmarks, or goals of student achievement for school accountability, as well as any aspect of teacher or principal quality, effectiveness, or evaluation systems, or require any data collection beyond current reporting requirements. There are similar prohibitions that are scattered throughout the Every Child Achieves Act. In short, Mr. President, I'm confident that the Act returns control of state standards, curriculum, instruction, assessments, educator qualifications, and school accountability to the state of Alaska, and that's where I want it to be. I also have other reasons for supporting the Act that will directly impact students, parents, educators, and communities across Alaska in a positive way, and with provisions that Alaskans ask for most specifically. I want to acknowledge the work that I was able to do with Senator Boxer. Together, we worked to craft and support the After School for Americans Children's Act. She and I worked on this bill to update and strengthen the 21st Century Community Learning Center after schools programs across the country. And we worked with a number of other members here to make sure that this important program, the program that keeps our children safe and engaged after school and during the summer, works for all of our states. And we worked with the chairman and the ranking member, and after a lot of good negotiation, the After Schools for American Children Act, with some amendments, was included in the overall Every Child Achieve Acts. And this was done by unanimous consent in the Help Committee, which I appreciate. On the issue of how we ensure that our Native children are cared for and addressed in a real and meaningful way, there were several provisions that we were able to include in the Act to better meet the needs of Native children. At my request, the Act requires the states and the school districts, where applicable, to consult and engage with the American Indian, Alaska Native, or Native Hawaiian tribes and parents in creating state and local plans and implementing federal education programs that serve Native students in order to meet their cultural, language, and education needs. These are our nation's first peoples, with whom the United States has a constitutionally mandated responsibility to interact with on a government-to-government basis. So I think it's time that our tribes and our Native organizations throughout the country will be part of designing the plans and shaping the programs used to improve schools that serve our Native students. Senator Franken and I, working with Senator Tester, were able to include a new program in the Every Child Achieves Act to help our nation's First Peoples maintain and revitalize their native languages through the schools. This is a new grant program that will support the creation, the improvement, and expansion of native language immersion schools, in which Alaska Native, American Indian, and Native Hawaiian students learn their lessons through their ancestral languages. This opportunity will help preserve the fast vanishing native languages of our First Peoples. So what we work to do within the program, the Native American and Alaska Native Language Immersion Schools and programs, will help the native language immersion schools develop curriculum and assessments, provide professional development to teachers and other staff, and carry out activities that will promote the maintenance and revitalization of these endangered languages. This is a provision that I really am quite proud of what we have been able to do working with our colleagues to make sure that we do not lose that focus in this important act. We also eliminate some technical red tape that makes it nearly impossible for Alaska's rural school districts to claim impact aid dollars to which they're entitled just because NCLB and Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act didn't play well together. And while it's more than complicated to explain, let's just leave it in saying that many rural Alaskan school districts are no longer going to have to bang their heads against a brick wall of illogical and contradictory federal rules after this provision is enacted, and that's always a good thing. I would only point out that fixing this problem started because a handful of school business officials and superintendents took the time to reach out to me to let me know we've got a problem here. This is really one of those examples where working together, we're all building legislation. I'm also quite proud to have helped include strong improvements to the Alaska Native Educational Equity Program. We call it ANEP in this legislation. For some years now, Alaska Native leaders have asked, why do schools get all of the Title VII Indian Ed money and most of the ANEP funding? And they explained that they are more than ready to take on more responsibility to help their children achieve in school. Alaska Native leaders have a valuable and indeed an indispensable role to play in designing and implementing programs to help our children succeed. These are sound arguments. While Alaska receives no funding from the Bureau of Indian Education and our schools receive the Title VII Part A funding, the government-to-government relationship between the federal government and Alaska tribes and Native organizations has not been fully honored under ANEP. Under the amendments that we include in the Act, ANEP funds will either go directly to tribes and Native organizations that have expertise running education programs, or the funds will go to tribes and Native organizations without such experience who partner with school districts. In addition, tribes and tribal organizations may partner with the university and other non-Native entities if they so choose. This will not only honor our constitutional relationship to Alaska Natives, but ensure that they can take on more responsibility for helping their children succeed, which, again, is the right thing to do here. Mr. President, in closing, I would just say that the Every Child Achieves Act is a good piece of legislation, and it's getting better, I think, with each day as we consider additional amendments. It is far, far better than what we ever had with No Child Left Behind. And while I'm positive that each of us will have more thoughts about how this could be a better bill, be a more perfect piece of legislation, if only one or two more changes were made, on the whole, this is a sound improvement over the current failed law. I certainly intend to be supportive as we move through the end of this process. With that, Mr. President,